Welcome. I'm here with Dr. Mic Hunter. Thank you very much. And you are a licensed psychologist and also a licensed marriage and family therapist here in the Twin Cities.
Right.
Is that right?
Yep.
Anything else we need to add to that?
I don't think so. That sounds like plenty.
Okay. We first met one another, I think, after you heard the interview that I gave.
Yes.
On Minnesota Public Radio with Terry Miller?
I contacted you then.
Yeah, I think you had kind of a humorous subject line as well, something about what kind of rifle would Jesus shoot.
Yes.
It actually reminded me a bit of some of the table of contents titles that you had. And so maybe we could start there. What was kind of interesting or fascinating to you about the Faith and Firearms project?
Well, back to the source, the book you're referring to,
right?
Basically, because I work with a lot of trauma victims and people in recovery from various addictive disorders, spiritual issues come up all the time. And so I work with anything from, agnostics, atheists, fundamentalists, everything in between. And one of the existential crises of most trauma victims is, where was God when this happened?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then based on what kind of God image they have, that will determine kind of the filter that they look at through.
Huh. I want to come back to the God image thing, but keep talking.
Okay. So 80% of people, last poll I looked at, say He when referring to God.
Huh.
Our Father who art in heaven. Okay. And so what people do is transfer their relationship with their biological father onto their God.
Huh.
And so pretty much, if I ask somebody, tell me about your relationship with your dad.
Yeah.
And then later on I say, tell me about your relationship with God. They'll use the exact same words in the same order sometimes. I mean, my dad was really smart and knew everything, and, you don't want to get him mad, and, okay, so you kind of respected him, but you also feared him, okay. Tell me about your God. Wow, God knows everything, he's powerful, and you wouldn't want to piss him off. Okay, same exact image. Yeah. And so, it works the other way, too. If you had a gentle, kind, loving, supportive father, you say, how about God? Well, hey, same exact thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the firearms and faith and all of that issue is, do you have primarily an Old Testament version of God, angry, wrathful, jealous, supports the killing of others? As long as you're righteous, as long as you're on the right side, it's okay to be violent. And then the New Testament God, which is all about love and forgiveness. And
you talk a lot about nonviolence, so that's a big emphasis.
Exactly, right. And yet we have these people that have, these, wrestling matches in the church or full contact martial arts and things. Just this idea that I think men with a more traditional gender role expectation are uncomfortable with this idea of Jesus being this, forgiver, turn the other cheek, nonviolent person. That just doesn't seem manly to them, and so they're torn between, how do you be a follower of this guy, whether you believe he's the Christ or not, and still be manly.
So you see, I'm glad you're making some of these connections, because in my kind of quote-unquote normal interviews, I'll often ask people how they think about God. And I'm trying to see if there are connections between how gun owners think about God and the ways in which they construct an ethics of violence, or an ethics of nonviolence.
Sure, yeah.
And you would say that there's a pretty strong connection there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If you look through history, the whole idea of a holy war. Well, we have to kill the non-believers. That's what Jesus would want us to do. Really? Because the stories are about him being inclusive. and not following the rules. Like, oh, this woman committed adultery, she'd be stoned to death. And he says, yeah, well, in effect, the moral is anybody who hasn't sinned, go at it. And everybody walks away. Okay, so that he's saying, yeah, I know that's what's supposed to happen, but that's not the loving thing to do. We're going to do the loving thing.
And he defuses that moment.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. It's interesting that in a lot of the interviews I've done, especially with young men or with men in general, I'll ask them to narrate their history with guns. When did you first encounter them? What are your good and bad experiences with them? And I would say the vast majority make a reference to their fathers or to their grandfathers as the ones who kind of introduced them. And so guns then become almost a matter of inheritance.
Well, literally.
Quite literally,
right,
in many cases.
Right, yeah.
This was Dad's shotgun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the idea of that this being a rite of passage, in the Jewish faith, you have a bar mitzvah. Now you're a man. We have a ritual. Now you're a man. You weren't a man here. Now you're a man here. Okay. Well, what are the other rituals? Well, get drunk, get laid, get a gun, get a car. Okay, and that so that. And I'll hear people say, well, I like to go hunting, but mostly it's for hanging out at the deer camp with the guys.
Sure.
Right. If we get a deer, that's nice. Okay. So if you say, well, we're going to, then don't take a gun. Oh, I don't know, that something important is missing.
Huh.
Okay. And I work with a lot of people who are physically abused or sexually abused as children, and in Minnesota, you can have a permit to carry a concealed weapon, and so I've started asking about that, and
whether their families had members who carried weapons.
Yes, and I say, how about you? Do you have a permit to carry? Yeah. Are you packing now? Yeah, I am. Okay. Do you wear it every day? No. Okay. How come you wore it today? I don't know. It just seemed like a good idea. You think it might have to do with that you're going to meet in private, behind closed doors, with a male authority figure?
Huh.
What happened in your past when you...
Yeah, and then you begin to probe.
Right, yeah.
So, thinking about some of these patients that you've had who are gun owners, do you find that there are kind of moments of trauma that were kind of defining of how they think about it, how they should interact with violence in the world, how they should encounter violence, and things like that? Do you see correlations there?
Well, to me, one of the things that happens for people that experience trauma is that they learn there's two kinds of people in the world. The people that dish it out and the people that take it. And they say, well, I was one of the people that took it. Now I'm going to be one of the people that dishes it out.
So there's an underlying narrative that they're living into.
Right.
What is an alternative narrative that you might want to spin, or might want to help somebody move toward?
Well, the idea of excuse me, of
whether get some water if you need it.
That's okay. If somebody has an irrational or obsolete belief, I'm always asking. Okay, you can't trust anybody. Okay, I'd say, well, that's an irrational belief. And then when I first present that, they'll go, well, no. I said, well, do you trust me? I guess so. Okay, all right. You haven't done anything so I mistrust you. Okay. So somehow you were taught that, this extreme version, nobody's trustworthy. I said, are you trustworthy? Well, yes, I am. Okay, so there's at least 1.5 of us, you and maybe me. Okay, so that's an irrational belief that you were taught when you couldn't say, no, that doesn't make sense, because you didn't have a lot of experience and you didn't have a mature brain. Or it might be that I'm not safe in my home. Maybe that was true when you were a kid, that there was, drunken violence and, you witnessed that and everything. When was the last time in your house that took place? Well, it never happens. Okay, so maybe it's an obsolete belief. Maybe.
So when you say obsolete, okay, I see what you're saying.
That it used to be true.
Yeah, but maybe not anymore.
Yeah. Or another example is this guy comes in and he says, I served in the combat zone, and I learned to sleep with a sidearm under my pillow, and at the slightest noise, I would wake up already pointing the gun. And I said, well, that probably seems like a good idea to me in a combat zone. He goes, yeah. Well, the trouble is, it was my granddaughter this time.
The noise
that I heard. I'm not in a combat zone. He said, well, so how come you sleep with a pistol? Because I can't sleep otherwise. Okay, so he's engaged in this now dangerous behavior. And so it's obsolete. That used to make sense, but it doesn't make sense anymore. So how are things different now than they were then? And kind of, well, let's update the file.
Yeah, that really is fascinating. I want to turn quickly to the book, because there's a lot in here about nonviolence and your own thinking about it. And Jesus, I think, really is at the center of this whole thing. The subtitle, in fact, is The Spiritual Principles of Jesus. So you kind of prioritize, I think, Jesus and the Gospels in a way that kind of also emphasizes his nonviolence. And I want to. There's a section toward the end where you talk about the kind of fight churches. Will you maybe give just kind of a brief reflection on what you're trying to get at there, and the critique that you're lodging against those churches?
Well, I'm asking these people to look at what appears to be, hypocrisy or a non-understanding of the teachings, where anytime somebody says, I'm doing violence in the name of Jesus, it's like, well, then maybe you don't understand what he taught. You know, I mean, you can disagree with it, but if you're going to use in his name, then be consistent.
Because I think the point you're making there is that these churches are lifting up an image of Christ that is what they would maybe call manly, and violent, and deeply violent, and that then becomes a model for them to do ministry. I mean, some of the churches you talk about, I think, have kind of not fight club, but mixed martial art or martial arts based ministries and things like that. And so you're kind of calling into question that manlier, as it were.
The whole premise of it. And there's a quote in there from the church in the same town where, now I'm blocking on his name, the man was killed and left tied to a barbed wire fence for being gay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what this guy says is, they're doing the passion play, and the minister starts saying, I just hate it when people have this kind of wimpy, feminized Jesus. He was a man's man. He didn't cry out when they beat him. He
would have had missing teeth, I think.
Yeah. So, like that. Yes, he suffered, but he suffered in a manly way, and that's the way we should be, and not this wimpy version.
Yeah. As you think about kind of the gun debate more generally, it's sort of always, it's rarely ever the thing, except for after a crisis or something like that, but it's always kind of part of the political noise. What do you think are some of the maybe problems or even possibilities that you might see in the current conversation? Possibilities for what you might see as progress, or?
Yeah. Well, most of the people who come to see me have some anxiety.
Yeah.
And anxiety is different than fear. Fear is an emotion that's rapid, and then it's over with. It just gets your attention so that you take action, and it's in response to something that is present. Okay, so like, let's say I see something on the ground and I go, I thought it was a snake. I thought it was a snake, and I look, it's a garden hose, a black garden hose. Okay, but there really was something there. I misinterpreted. But better to jump and find out, it's just a garden hose, than to go, what the, and get nailed by a snake. Okay. Anxiety is imagining a threat. Okay, so I think it was Mark Twain that said, I've survived thousands of catastrophes, most of which have never occurred. But you're imagining it. Okay? And the problem with imagining these threats, and people who are, normal people, not psychotic, they imagine things that could happen. Not if I say, hey, there's an airport across the river over there, a plane could crash into this building, That's true, isn't it?
Sure.
Okay. And, and if I say, well, it hasn't happened in 100 years, a really anxious person says, well, then you're due. It's about time that it happened. Okay? Because they're predicting something bad happening. Yeah. And they probably lived in a place where bad things did happen. And the idea is, if I just figure it out, then I can protect myself. So they become hypervigilant. And their body tightens up because you can fight, flight, or freeze in response to a threat. Well, you can't fight it because it's not present. You can't flee it because it's in your head. So that leaves freeze. And so then people tighten up, they get this chronic tension, which sends a tactile signal to the brain that something's wrong. And so it's a loop.
Yeah.
Oh, there must be, it's almost like I hear a siren, so there must be a problem. Okay, so the body on a less than conscious levels is like, wait a minute, I got all this tension, there must be something wrong. Where is it? And you start looking for it. Okay, and so one way to cope with that is to be armed. Like whatever, like I have a client who said that he has always, ever since he was a child, he's always lived on dead-end roads. And I said, well, how come? He goes, that way they can only come at me from one way.
Oh,
and I said, who's they? He goes, well, whoever they are that want to hurt me. Okay, so it's not like he had, this Mr. Johnson threatened my life and is coming at me. It's somebody is going to come get me at some time, so I got to be ready for it.
And that's anxiety as opposed to fear.
Right.
And I have to imagine that these images of God that you talked about earlier are somehow tied into that sense of threat, sense of constant anxiety.
Right.
I think I'm wandering into dangerous territory by asking this question, so you can just qualify this however you like.
Yeah.
Of the people you've worked with, who among them have had really healthy images of God? And what, I know there maybe isn't one only, but what are some examples of healthy ways of thinking about God?
Well, to me, it would be the good parent. Okay, and so the good parent doesn't let the kid do anything they want. They set limits and have reasonable expectations, and that that I quote some ministers in there that talk about how we're unworthy of God's love and forgiveness, and God is disgusted by us, and it's like, how is that? If that's the image, that doesn't sound like somebody I want to go to and ask for help. As opposed to somebody who you say, you messed up, and here's what you can do to make it better. And you can forgive yourself and you can forgive others. That's what it's all about. What would be the most loving thing to do towards yourself and towards others? Both. You don't just say, I am what matters, or they are what matters. We matter. And most of my work, I say, is about forgiveness of self and others for what people did and didn't do.
Thank you. Give me just a second. I want to kind of thumb through my notes and make sure.
I want to say one thing.
Please do. Go ahead while I'm looking. Yeah.
Before I forget it, is that one of the things when I was writing my book, Honor Betrayed, which is about sexual abuse in the military, is all the research on the number of traumas that enlisted people have prior to going into the military. And so when people are trying to figure out how come this soldier and this soldier are in the same battle, and one develops PTSD and the other one doesn't, well, one reason is that that person may already have PTSD from these other traumas, and it's just now turbocharged, or they didn't have PTSD yet, but one more trauma was enough to tip them over the edge.
Oh yeah, and the intense experience of combat.
You're right.
Can be that tipping point.
Yeah.
I was struck by this sentence on page 133. This is on forgiveness. You say, I would argue that the primary way most of us begin to hate isn't from personal experience, but rather by being taught to hate by the words and actions of family members, religious leaders, and other role models. And the connection I see here is hatred isn't something that maybe just occurs within a moment, but it kind of happens along this progression, this timeline.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to think about also practices of violence and how those are learned and how that might be related to how, whether a person would choose to pick up a gun. And of course, people would own guns for many reasons, maybe hunting, and they would never think about self-defense, or they would, maybe people do carry for the sake of protection. But I wonder about to what degree those practices are learned.
Well, I can think about it. When I went to junior high, and that's called middle school now, but my mother said, you're going to be around kids that are bigger than you, and I guarantee you that this is going to happen to you.
You'll be bullied or something like that.
They're going to grab your hat, and they're going to throw it back and forth and try to get you to run back and forth. Yeah. And if you go for that, if you play that game, it will never stop. She said, so the very first time it happens, what I want you to do is nothing. I'll buy you another hat. You won't get in any trouble. Just don't play the game.
Interesting.
Okay. And sure enough, these guys take my hat, they're throwing it back, and go, come on, don't you want your hat? And he goes, nah, my mom said this would happen, and so no, I'm not going to play. Well, we won't give you your hat back. Yeah, I know. I'll have another one tomorrow. And they were like, oh, come on. I was like, no, all right, here's your hat back. And then it never happened to me ever again.
Interesting. Okay. You didn't defeat the monster.
Yeah, exactly. So they went and picked on somebody else who would play by the rules. All right, now, what she taught me was nonviolent defense. Okay? And now what somebody could have said is, okay, when this kid grabs your hat, he's expecting you to run toward the other guy to try to get it. So kick the first guy in the crotch.
Right.
And they won't mess with you anymore. Right. All right? The goal is the same.
The goal is the same.
Yeah. The method is different.
What do you think, this is a qualitative question, but what do you think the toll is on an individual's spirit or person of living a life that sees violence as a proper response to violence?
Well, I'll do a little self-disclosure here, is that I was talking to a friend of mine who's a retired homicide cop, and I was telling him about...
Oh, an investigator?
Yeah. About this situation that I was faced with. It's, somebody that was mentally ill and wanted to harm me and all of this. And he said, well, do you carry a gun? And I said, no. I said, I can think of lots of times I wish I had a gun, but not any time I think it would have been a good idea. And he said, well, when this guy kills you, the cop's going to be standing over your body saying, didn't anybody see this coming? Because, this is the quintessential pattern.
Oh, that somebody would threaten you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they will end up dead.
Wow.
Okay. And I was like, wow.
It's intense.
Geez, this is a guy with experience.
Right.
Okay. And so I took the course and I started carrying a sidearm.
Oh, you personally?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. We're in your own story.
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly. And the first couple of weeks it was kind of weird that, wow, I have a gun. I have a gun on me. I wonder if anybody else in here has one. And so nobody better mess with me. And so I had this sense of
heightened sense of empowerment.
Yes. But then I noticed the longer I wore it, the more I started thinking about potential violence. That I was busy looking for it. Like, what would I do if? Whereas when I didn't have it, I wasn't thinking about it. I was not thinking about violence. I was thinking about having lunch. But if I had a gun, it was like, well, if something happens, what would I have to do or not do to make this a legal shooting? And so I'm busy thinking about all these things.
Right. So that almost created a sense of anxiety.
Yes, it did.
Anxiety in terms of potential threats.
Right.
And you found, did that sort of dampen your spirit in ways? How did it affect you?
Well, anytime you're thinking about one thing, you can't think about something else.
Yeah.
And that. I mean, and certainly cops talk about this. That they become hyper vigilant, and the problem is they have trouble turning it off when they go home. They go home and they don't talk to their kids; they interrogate them.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. And so what I always recommend is come in, take your uniform off, put on some other clothes, and open the then talk to people. Make a shift.
An actual shift.
Yeah. But when I've been to parties that are primarily cops, every one of them has at least one sidearm on. Some of them two, and they're not on duty,
right.
But this is their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And they say, "Well, I don't think about it anymore." Yeah, you don't think about it consciously, but I do notice that you're, and they'll admit it when I say, "You're not listening to me. You're looking over my shoulder at that car driving by." Well, you never know. Well, see, other people don't do that.
And you ultimately couldn't. You came to a point where you couldn't live that way anymore.
Well,
you just didn't want to.
I didn't want to. Yeah, and the other day I got a report where maybe this guy is in town, and I thought, well, maybe I better carry this weekend, and then I couldn't.
Oh, this guy who had threatened you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I couldn't find my little card that says I have a permit.
Oh, okay.
And so I was like, I'm not going to break the law to carry this thing because I could get in trouble.
Sure.
I just won't. Okay. Now, maybe if he had called me, if he had called me and said, I'm going to come get you, then I don't care about the card.
Okay. Your life is important.
Right.
Wow, that's why I do appreciate your willingness to kind of open that door on your own life a bit. I just appreciate your vulnerability on that point. Let's see. Let me glance again back at my notes. Sometimes I forget what I was going to ask.
Well, let me give you another thing
while
you're doing that. One of the things I ask clients is, are you perfectly safe in this moment? And most people say, well, of course not. And I say, well, how come? Well, what if you pulled a gun on me or a knife? Or what if somebody burst in here? Or what if the floor collapsed? Or, caught fire? I say, yeah, all of those things would be pretty scary, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Are any of them happening to you right now?
Huh.
No, but they could. I know. How long is a moment? It's over, right? A moment was just over.
Right.
None of those things were happening. Now, at some point in your life, you won't be safe.
Yeah.
You will die. Okay? But that isn't this moment. This moment, you are perfectly safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the first intervention to anxiety.
Is to help people move into the realization that this very moment is safe.
I'm safe, perfectly safe. Okay, and then the second thing is, people that are nervous, they tighten up their gut, and so they don't breathe properly. So they don't get enough oxygen, so they can't think very clearly, and they don't get rid of carbon dioxide, which is what triggers panic. So the next thing I do is teach them to breathe properly from their belly. And then the third thing I teach them is a way to relax the muscles around their pelvis, because that's the first place that people go. They're girding up their loins, right, to fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And when I took the permit to carry test, I went out and emptied the clip onto the target, and the guy said, "Wow, you practice a lot." And I said, "No, it's the second time in my life I've ever shot a pistol." And he goes, "Well, you're one dangerous motherfucker, because look
because
at
you
that."
know how to handle
Yeah. And I said, "Well, because I meditate. And so I am in charge of my breathing, where other people tighten up, and so they're not thinking clearly, and they're getting the carbon dioxide build up, and they're tight, where I was relaxed." Now, nobody was shooting at me, so,
Sure.
you know. But if you're going to start out tense
Right.
and go into a tense situation, you're going to end up distressed, not just stressed. Okay? If you start out relaxed, you get stressed,
Yeah.
you're paying attention,
Right.
but you're not distressed.
Yeah.
Okay? And, you know, like my drum instructor is like, you're not breathing.
You
Yeah.
play the drums.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, and what's happening? Well, I'm not getting it. And I'm starting to get anxious, and I'm kind of embarrassed, and because I'm his oldest student, everybody comes out and they're, you know, 8 and I can hear them. They're doing way better than me. Okay, and so he said, well, breathe, you know. Or my friend that teaches martial arts, he says, you know, I can teach people to do a spin kick, but if they don't breathe while they're doing it, they're never going to be any good at it.
Because of that anxiety.
Because
You
of
probably
anxiety.
remember from your permit to carry class that they sometimes talk about the levels of awareness, the color code.
Yep.
White, yellow, orange, red. Something like this. And I think that they are attempting there to encourage a level of, they would maybe say awareness, I think you would say anxiety. Maybe because I think they would, or maybe.
Well, awareness to me, that is primarily a cognitive thing. Like, I live 2 blocks from here, but I park at my office.
Okay.
All right. And so, last night at 2 a.m., I walked 2 blocks in the dark. Okay. Well, I had a choice. I could walk this way or this way. Well, this way has a lot of places where somebody could hide. This is wide open. So I'm going to go there.
You're aware.
I'm aware that this would be safer. Okay, but I wasn't anxious, which means that I didn't have tension. I was relaxed. Now, if I'd gotten some new information, like, oh, wait a minute, that looks weird, then I would have gotten some stress. But if I would started out relaxed, let's say, you know, I carry myself at a 1 or a 2, you know, and I go up to a 4.
Right.
Well, now I'm more attentive. Okay.
Right.
But if I start out at a 4 and I go up to a 6, I'm pretty close to distressed where I can't think clearly.
Sure.
Which is not in my best interest.
Right.
My friend that teaches martial arts, he says, if you're going to be tense, which I don't recommend, but if you're going to do it, always be tense around your friends, never around your enemies.
What do you?
You must be relaxed around your enemies so that you can react.
Well, now I'm remembering the story of that Chinese boy in the fraternity party, college. You talk about it in the book. There's a Chinese man who's he's at a party, and there is one of the other party attendees is drunk. And calls him a bunch of racial slurs and attempts to get him to fight him or whatever. And the guy, I think, just sort of walks out of the party. Thanks for the invitation. I'm leaving now.
Well, actually, more gracious than that. Thank you. I enjoyed myself.
Right.
I think it's a good time to go now.
Right.
I hope we can meet again. And the guy continues to insult him as he leaves.
Right.
And I remember, instead of thinking, well, what a coward, what I thought is, wow, I'm impressed that he could do that. I mean, that showed a lot of self-control, where I thought, you know what, I'd kind of have to fight the guy.
Oh, there's something in you that would feel compelled.
Yeah, that I'd have to. That I wouldn't have it. And that means he's in control of me. I don't like the sound of that. I want to be able to be free to choose.
Right.
And, okay, I don't need to fight this guy to try to defend my masculinity or my whatever, that I can just, laugh it off.
Right. Well, let me shift to just one other... I'm kind of coming to the end of my line of questions, but you had mentioned that prior to taking your permit to carry class, you had one other experience with a pistol?
Yeah.
Is that right? Was that with your police officer friend? Or was it
No, my dad had a...
Oh, your dad did?
Yeah, my dad was in the Naval Reserve and then in the Marine Corps and then in the Army, and he had purchased a .38 automatic and a .22 bolt-action rifle, and the handgun was clearly for self-protection.
Oh, okay.
And the .22 was target shooting.
Sure.
And so we went out as my brother and my father and I would shoot at cans.
Right.
Okay, and so that was a very bonding experience for us, and kind of a sign of him trusting us.
I see.
And then I one summer worked at a resort where my job was to shoot squirrels because they chewed through the wires, and it was very expensive to track down. So I got $1 a squirrel, and I used that rifle. And it meant something to me that was, it was my father's. And then when he died, I inherited it. And, I haven't gotten rid of it. I haven't shot it for years. But so it was clear that you could use a rifle, you could use a firearm for recreation, or you could use it to defend yourself.
And you, in fact, did both.
Yes.
At different points in your life. Yeah. How do you think, you just said your father's dead, your mother died.
Yeah.
How do you think he'd react to a book like this? Having been a military man, also someone who owned for the sake of protection, what do you think?
Well, I think he would have thought that I was being naive.
Huh.
Yeah, that because he was pretty convinced that there was going to be a race war at some point.
Oh, okay.
And that was one reason to keep weapons, because when that broke out, you're going to have to defend yourself.
Wow.
And he was very horribly physically abused by his stepfather to the point of very serious hospitalization, injury. So it was pretty clear from the stories that he joined the Marine Corps to become a man.
Oh, interesting.
Because my grandmother and my father would tell this story about he came back from boot camp, and my grandmother meted him, and he was carrying himself differently. And she, from this kind of victim role, kind of slouched over, but he was standing upright, confident. And she said, "They turned my baby into a killer." And he was like, "Yeah." And he was, like, "Thank you." It
was a moment of pride.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I can kill you 5 different ways with my bare hands. And now I'm safe. That's the part he didn't say, but that's
what you picked
That's
up.
the message. Yeah.
Wow. That really is a fascinating story. And did you write this before he died at all?
No, he died long ago.
And
before the one on sexual abuse in the military,
before that one,
yeah.
Also. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Was that somehow the writing of that book somehow motivated by your own thinking about?
Well, no. Actually, what happened was I had written Abused Boys in 1990 when people didn't believe that boys got sexually abused.
Oh. Wow.
And I went through 100 publishers, and they all told me, well, it doesn't happen, and even if it did, it wouldn't hurt them. Okay.
Wow, that is an interesting assumption.
Yes. And now if you go on the street and ask the first 10 people, 9 out of 10 are going to go, yes, it happens, and yes, it hurts them. Duh. Okay, but in 1990, that wasn't the case. And then I got all this these therapists calling up and saying, I don't know anything about this issue. My client came in, they read your book, they know way more about this than I do. Help. And so I edited 4 different books on the subject.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
There's ways of helping your fellow psychologists work their way through these things.
Yep. And so then I got a call from somebody, and he said, well, you've written all these books on the sexual abuse of males. When are you going to write one about the sexual abuse of military people? And I didn't know anything about it. So I said, how often could that happen? And he said, you'd be surprised. And so I said, well, I like to have first-person accounts in all of my books.
Sure.
And I know the first thing that people are going to say is, what branch did you serve in? And when I say I've never been in the military, they're going to hang up on me. He says, you'll be surprised. And so I thought, well, it's not like in 1989 when in order to find people to tell their stories, I went to laundromats and put up a little card.
Wow.
This is the internet now.
Right.
Okay, so I just sent out emails and said,
right,
here's what I'm considering doing if I can find these people. In the next day, my box is full. You know, wow. I saw it posted on the Vietnam Veterans Nurses page. Who knew? I didn't know there was. I didn't know that. All right, and so the first question was, did you serve in the military? No. Oh, good. Then I'll talk to you.
Huh.
And by the end of it, I'd say, well, just one more question.
Yeah.
How come?
Yeah.
And they'd say, because if you served in the military, you wouldn't believe me. You wouldn't want to believe me about what happened, because it would dishonor, the military, and part of what they have is the concept of acceptable loss. You're going to, unlike Target Corporation going out on a picnic, you don't expect to lose 10% of your employees.
Right.
That would be a disaster. Okay.
Right.
But, you say, well, we're going to go capture this thing, and there are going to be people killed and maimed, and that just goes with the territory.
Right.
And so if somebody gets raped, it's like, well, we don't want to wreck morale. And that's what some of the publishers said. Well, we're at war, and so this is a bad time, to bring this up.
Was this during the Gulf War?
Yeah.
Yeah, the first.
Right. So I had no plans to write a book on that, and then when I did, it was completely ignored. I didn't get.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you said it was difficult to find publishers in the
Yes,
first place.
right.
That is remarkable.
Yeah. And part of what happened is I did get some interviews, press and media, and then it wasn't printed or broadcast. And so I called them up and say, what happened? And they go, oh, yeah, well, my editor said that it's not really newsworthy.
Wow.
Really? That a huge percentage, double digits, of our military people are being sexually assaulted by their comrades is not news? Yeah, no, that's what he said.
Wow. That's
somebody said,
yeah.
When I was complaining about this, somebody said, it's too big. If you said 2%, well, that's news. That's interesting. We don't have to change the whole system.
Right, it's threatening.
Yeah, but oh my God, this is huge. And when people would say, well, if that's what happens when you put women in the military, well, actually, there was plenty of rape in the military when there weren't women.
Huh.
That there are plenty of men who got raped.
Yeah, whereas in the present day, I think that kind of statement would receive an ear or two.
Yeah.
Given all the conversations about sexual violence in the military and PTSD and whatnot. So, Dr. Hunter, this has been a really rich interview, kind of wide ranging. I apologize that it wasn't more linear.
No,
humans rarely ever are, I suppose.
Yeah.
But this has been valuable, and I really appreciate your taking.
Sure. And if you need some follow-up, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Okay.